Welcome to the Spacedojo show. I'm your host, Josh Owens, and today our panel includes Ben Diuguid. Welcome, Ben.
Hey.
And our special guest today is Thomas Goldenberg. Welcome.
Hi, Josh. Hey, Ben.
Do you prefer Tom or Thomas?
Tom. Only my immediate family call me Thomas.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. I'm immediate family now, of course. So today, I know we've talked about it in the past, like right when the show back in January pivoted to kind of cover more JavaScript topics. We covered React Native with Bonnie Eisman, and she did a good job. But I feel like using JavaScript for mobile is pretty important, and I wanted to come back and kind of cover the topic again. And so I still have not used React Native yet, but I know Tom has. Have you, Ben, used React Native?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Haven't had the chance, but I look forward to it when I do.
Awesome. All right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Tom, and what you've been working on and how it relates?
Sure. I'm pretty new to the whole software engineering scene. I kind of had a career switch about 2 years ago. And when I was investigating the jungle that is JavaScript frameworks at the time, I really fell in love with React. And so I invested pretty early on. And, all the jobs that I've gotten since then have involved React and Meteor as well, which is how we know each other. But when I had the opportunity from a Meteor and React job to work with a company doing React Native, I jumped on it. And that was about a year ago. And since then, I've been involved in the community and just recently published a tutorial for building apps with React Native.
Yeah, nice. We talked about it a little bit on the Creator Podcast not too long ago. And that's actually like how the conversation got started. And one of the things that I found interesting in the tutorial, maybe less about React Native, but was the backend service that you're using. Can you tell us a little bit about Deployed?
Yeah, sure. So the way that the tutorial came about was I had partnered as a side project with a friend of mine, Nick Brown. He's a product manager at Huge, which is, does a lot of consulting work for mobile apps. And, we built an app with React Native for iOS, and, we came across so many obstacles because of lack of documentation. And so that's how we decided to get the idea to build this tutorial. And when we were building the tutorial, we wanted to make the API part of it as easy as possible. And we just kind of happened across Deployed. It makes it really easy to just spin up an API really fast. And they have a graphical user interface so that you can just type in the name of your collections, have kind of constraints on the collections for what type of data it can have. And it's worked fairly well.
Yeah, that's nice. That's always a challenge. I feel like I give a class where we teach students how to build a Cordova application using Meteor and React. And I feel like a good portion of the time is spent kind of showing off the Meteor backend system. And that's not necessarily like the interesting part of the class. Like it's probably good for some people, but if you're not familiar with it, like I shoot it at you so fast, I feel like people maybe get confused. So I definitely like always on the lookout for easier ways to.
Yeah, and the thing with Meteor, the whole DDP connection, like it definitely works well with React Native apps, but that's only for a situation where you need that real-time connectivity. And I feel in the majority of cases, people just want a REST API endpoint for their mobile app. And so that's why we looked away from Meteor. The actual tutorial, the website for it is built with Meteor because we love building web apps with it. But, for a REST API, there are definitely a lot of other options.
You guys look into GraphQL at all? I know there's services like Reindex, and I think there's another one, I'm forgetting the name, that offer like GraphQL backends as a service. You guys think about that at all? Or?
So at the time, we started this it's been many months in the making, this tutorial. And so we had the idea like 10 months ago, I want to say, after we initially released our iOS app. And so GraphQL back then wasn't really on my radar. And in the last 2 or 3 months after, watching a lot of tutorials and talks and stuff, I feel like it's starting to get a lot more adoption. So, we decided to stick with REST to fit like the majority of use cases. But I myself am definitely looking into GraphQL. I find it extremely interesting. What about you, Josh? Have you done anything with GraphQL?
I just started a project for a client, and like I've actually got to do some GraphQL stuff for it, like tonight or tomorrow. So maybe ask me again later. But no, like it's definitely super interesting to me. Like I think it solves a problem that I had like when I worked at Outright, a company that got bought by GoDaddy. Like they didn't have a good API set up. There wasn't any thought put into it up front. And like GraphQL definitely tends to solve that problem and force you to build something good up front and not have to think about like what's being sent back and forth. Like as long as the server knows how to resolve it, like you can serve it to the clients that care.
I mean, I've been experimenting with it lately, and just I think it's the Star Wars example that they have as in a lot of their documentation, and it's pretty freaking amazing. But I worked for a company. We use Meteor and React, and I feel like there has to be some time before you just make a big decision like that. And so I'm definitely investigating GraphQL for possibly bringing it into the company I work for now. But, some things you can't always be in the cutting edge. So right now I'm kind of in the exploration phase and seeing how easy it will be to transition into that.
Yeah, I tend to like sidestep that by greenfielding a new client and then telling them like, oh, hey, is it mission critical? Because like if it's not mission critical, we can totally try this new thing and it'll make sense for your business in the long run. And so like I've just convinced someone that they need it for their app, and yeah, we're gonna give that a go. Because I think like Meteor would not have been a good fit for this particular project because they don't need any real-time stuff. They're just kind of querying data and getting it back and displaying some graphs. So.
What about you, Ben? Have you done anything with GraphQL?
Yeah, I was on a research team for this company called Ultimate Software. I interned there last summer, and we built this app that used GraphQL. So the back end is all broken up into microservices, and we used event sourcing, CQRS, which stands for Command Query Response Segregation. Anyways, event sourcing on the back end, and then for the query model, so all the views, we just use GraphQL, so the client could get whatever it wanted. It's pretty cool. I really, really liked it. I'm a big fan of GraphQL.
So I was thinking about this earlier, and like Redux is kind of become standard procedure now. But at Agolo where I work, it took. I just wrote a blog post about this of, our migration from Meteor and React into, bringing in Redux. And, it took several months to really do the full research, to build a project, and then to bring it to the company and say, hey, this could really give us value. So I kind of feel like I'm in the beginning stages of that with GraphQL and investigation.
Yeah, GitHub just put out a good article where they kind of talked about that similar process, like just picking a portion of their API that they wanted to revamp with new functionality, and they built that with GraphQL and kind of forced them to create their infrastructure and how it works, and then now they're able to just kind of pull it out to the entire API. So definitely makes sense. I'm kind of curious, like when it comes to developing mobile apps, have you played with Cordova before, or progressive web apps, or any other form of like building a mobile app prior to trying React Native?
So like I said, I'm kind of a beginner on the scene, and I like I said, I only have 2 years of experience in just software engineering in general, and I just naturally made the transition to React Native. I mean, I was using Meteor to build web apps. And I suppose I could have utilized it to build mobile apps at the time, but the people that I talked to weren't that happy with how the results they were getting. So while I haven't used Cordova, I don't have firsthand experience with, the Meteor Cordova integration. Organizing the React Native meetup in NYC, I get to talk to a lot of people who have used these different technologies, and that's kind of formed some of my opinions.
Yeah. I think, to me, like React Native is super interesting because I found the performance to be not quite there with Cordova. I think it's good enough, but maybe it's not the best, like depending on the app you're building, I guess. Like if I think about, just kind of looking at my phone, if I think about like a podcast player, like maybe it's okay for a podcast player to do Cordova, right? But maybe for something like Uber, it probably wouldn't make sense to use Cordova, because we're like drawing things on the screen and kind of using animations and that.
I mean, I think it really depends where you are as a company. Like, I think Amazon's entire app is still Cordova. So, I mean, they're doing plenty fine in terms of revenue and everything. So, but they also built it several years ago. And if Amazon were to launch now or whatever, I think they would make different decisions. So I definitely don't recommend React Native if you already have built out something, and you're thinking of ditching that and rebuilding the entire thing in React Native, because if that were the good thing to do, Facebook would be doing that, and they're not. So I think it meets a good use case for new companies, number one, that want to reach both the Android and iOS markets, because that's like increasingly very, very important. And for companies that are only on one platform. And so I've seen a lot of companies that are either only on iOS, and they want to expand to Android, and they have a dev team that knows JavaScript very well. And so they're building their Android app in React Native. That's what I've seen very commonly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I know there was a talk from, I think, React Europe a couple of years ago. Jed Watson talked about making a Cordova app, and he was comparing Cordova to React Native, and I found it really interesting because I guess previously to his talk, I was always just like, React Native is just kind of obviously superior to Cordova from, I guess, a lot of performance reasons, and then I think once you stand it, I just think it makes more sense. It's running more natively. But he gave this talk where he talked about Cordova and was saying you really can develop for mobile using web tech, like if you know what you're doing, like if you and if you really know the internals, and if you really try to make the web app that you're making, or the Cordova app that you're making, look like the standard like iOS guidelines and Android guidelines, it is doable.
Yeah.
And I think they have their own. So they're using React still, which is kind of cool. React and Cordova, and I think it's called Touchstone.js. And that was a really interesting talk because up until that point, I was pretty much like React Native for all mobile apps. Like, why wouldn't I? And I still think if I were to greenfield a project, I would use React Native. But it was an interesting topic.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, we used Meteoric for the last big project I was on that was mobile, and we used Cordova and Meteor and all that kind of stuff. And I think some of the performance issues we had was more related to DDP itself. Like DDP batching really would have helped a ton on this particular project. It's not necessarily, it didn't always come down to like Cordova couldn't do the thing we needed to do or couldn't do it fast enough. Like we did run into some memory issues, and I wonder if that's related to Cordova, but outside of that, like that's a great point. Like it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like Cordova versus React Native.
I mean, it really depends on, like I said, like what's your team? If your team is all Cordova developers and they have that experience, is it going to be worth it learning a new technology to build a new app? I think all things being equal, if it's a completely blank slate and you come in and choose Cordova or React Native, I would go for React Native, and that that's my bias because I've used React Native, and I feel like the arguments that I've heard for the performance are, I get that. The other difficulty with React Native is that some people complain about is that that it's been going through a lot of changes, and it hasn't really. A lot of people say it's not stable. There's been some breaking changes from release versions and everything. So building a tutorial, that was really interesting because we would build, these features and everything. And now, we have to change the code because one example was React Native had its own version of React in the React Native module. And then they refactored it out so that React Native there's only a sole React repository that React Native calls upon. So before you import React and your elements from React Native, and you have to go through your entire code and change stuff. That caused a lot of complaints from people. And since then, I feel like they're doing a good job at like trying to be very incremental in their changes. So those are some of the other disadvantages I've heard.
They ship really often, don't they? A new version of React Native.
Every week.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thing that Facebook has a team dedicated to this on React in React Native. And I think that's also kind of one reason to have some confidence in how it's going to grow.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I was kind of interested in, and I don't know like if your tutorial covers this or not, but like Bonnie's book covered it a little bit, but like how much code reuse are you seeing between creating like the iOS app and the Android app, and what's that like?
Yeah, sure. I love to talk about that. So obviously, there's going to be some platform specific stuff that you're going to use. What we're seeing is the community has come forward and has bridged that gap a little bit. So before, for example, you had an activity indicator iOS, and you have an activity indicator only for Android. And the community has made that native component work now just as activity indicator for both platforms. But we actually had in the React Native NYC meetup, we had a really cool talk from Delivery.com. And they're an example of a large company that experimented with React Native on iOS in their Cordova app, actually. So they did a small module using React Native. They liked it, and then they built an entire Android app in React Native. They got approval for it, and they gave a talk on reusing their components across the platforms. And I really wish it was recorded because they gave some great talks, but I'm going to talk to Jesse and Bruno so they can republish some of that stuff.
How does that work as far as sharing styling? Because I know you don't want the Android and iOS app to look exactly the same, and that's why you have these different, different native components. But like, there are different style guidelines for Android than there are for iOS, and so obviously you're not reusing the styling, correct? There.
I mean, I think it depends. I just before this podcast, I checked out Crater.io, and there was a blog post, React Native is dead, right?
Yeah, I actually put that one up, so it's pretty funny.
Was that you?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't write the post. I didn't write the post. I just saw it and thought it was really interesting.
So I thought it was really interesting. And Brent Vatne, who was on the React Native team, now he's with Exponent. There was, at the end of that, there was kind of like an appendix in his discussion. I really respect Brent. He's been an amazing contributor, and I think it's really great stuff that he's doing. But he brings up some good points, which is, material design is a great thing, but just because you're doing an Android app doesn't mean that you have to leverage all of material design. I love material design, and I use the Material UI package on Meteor and React for styling. But I do agree with that even if you're building an Android app, like you don't have to do everything exactly by that style guide. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at this article. I love the kind of the faux conversation at the top where the recruiter's like, why don't you want to work at a company that uses Cordova? And the guy's like, look at the top 100 apps in the App Store. None of those apps use Cordova. I want to build the best possible apps I can, so I don't use Cordova, nor am I interested in learning how to build Cordova applications. I don't even know how you know whether it uses Cordova or not. I guess I've never dived that deep, but it's interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Like one of the things he says in the blog post is that while React Native offers this awesome functionality, because it's open-ended and not really highly opinionated on how you should style it, that people end up making mobile apps that look like web apps. And totally true. I mean, people that are getting into React Native are doing so because they don't want to learn Swift. They don't want to have to code in Java to build an Android app. And so it's a great thing to do as a side project if you're a web developer.
Yeah, well, I think even if you're comfortable with Swift, right? Like, let's say I decide I do want to learn Swift. Like, you're right. There's one thing I don't want to do, and that's I don't want to learn Java just so I can put out an Android app. And that's where I think the beauty, like that code reviews, kind of comes into play. And I'm almost curious. Like, have you looked at React Web, which is like React Native, but it renders to web rather than like using React itself. You can still write the React Native components and put out a web.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting when I saw that coming out, that piece of news. And it kind of is like against the React philosophy of, right, learn once, write anywhere. And it's more like write once and run everywhere. But like people are doing all kinds of crazy stuff with React Native, and so yeah, if that fits someone's use case, that's great. I haven't actually tried it myself though. I would love to see a React Native for like iWatch. I think that would be really cool. We haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, so I don't know how easy that's going to be to pull off because like I think the Apple TV would maybe be the better target there. Or at least more interesting to me. Like I'd love to build a mobile or an app for the TV that's built using JavaScript. But it's definitely, I know like a lot of people are thinking about those types of things because they did announce that React Native it'll run on the Xbox and like Windows and that kind of thing. So that's super interesting.
There's React Native Desktop, and I even heard there's a React Native VR, which is pretty interesting. And then I keep seeing just all these various React stuff. I know React Sound is a library. It's for web. It's for normal React, but it just interfaces directly with the web audio API, but you write it in JSX, which is kind of cool. A bunch of stuff like that. But it's really interesting. React Native VR sounds crazy, but...
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. It sounds, I have to check that out.
All right. So one of the things you mentioned is that you've started the React Native meetup in New York City. Like what has that experience been like? And, what's attendance been like, that kind of thing?
So yeah, the way that it started, I was working at Sue, which was a startup in New York City, and we were at the time like the only company that I knew of in New York City using React Native. And so me and a coworker, Harry, and also Nick, who worked with me on the iOS app on the side, we just thought that there needed to be a specific meetup for this technology because there's a lot of React meetups and they'll do kind of like, getting started with React Native, one time every 5 months or so. But we wanted to build this community so that we could kind of share the difficulties we were going through at the time. And it's really grown a lot, and we've had some great talks by people, and it's amazing to see the interest in not just startups and small companies, but large companies are expressing interest and starting to use React Native. We're getting kind of like, I think it was CNN money and like more larger company. I said, delivery.com is, of course, But that's been one of the really interesting things that you start to see that people are starting to pay a lot more attention in New York City. So yeah, it's been a great experience.
Yeah, I think the React Native community is really interesting because it's so new, and all of the people in the React community kind of dove into the React Native community just head first when it first got announced, and it was just all this excitement from, oh, like this is so new and cool. And I know that the contributions to the React Native project are a lot higher than, I don't know how much higher, but they're higher than the React contributions, which I think is really cool. And just the whole concept of React Native and React it's just like, it's very unopinionated. So you see all these people coming together and just really sharing how they solved certain problems, and I guess sharing their opinions in a place where, like, typically React is very unopinionated, and it's really cool just to learn from other people and see how they're solving problems. I mean, there's so many different Redux and Flux implementations. It's a cool.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things, and I originally came from the Meteor community in New York, and when we started this meetup, I really tried to bring over a lot of the stuff that I felt when I participated in meetups in the Meteor community, because Meteor is such an awesome framework and community, because you have the Meteor forum, and it's like there's always someone there to kind of guide you with whatever question you have. And if you go to an in-person event like I did, even if you don't know anything, it's not kind of this elitist kind of culture of what you don't know what this is, or Redux or Reflux or whatever. It's like, oh, here, let me show you what Meteor is. It's let me help you build your first Hello World app. And so that's kind of what I want to bring to this meetup that we have in New York City.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would agree. Like, having run the Cincinnati Meteor meetup, like, that's definitely a good feeling to try to foster, and one that we always strove to kind of get people into the mindset of, like, come and share a little bit, and then have discussion time, and really just help each other learn and level up. And yeah, that's definitely good. And I was just looking, like, we don't have a Cincinnati React Native meetup. Kind of weird. It looks like someone's trying to start one.
There's only a few of us so far. There's one in San Francisco, and there's a couple internationally. There's one in Tel Aviv, I'm pretty sure, and so it's starting to grow. And we kind of, the different organizers, we talk to each other and kind of exchange ideas and kind of where our problems are, and try to solve them together.
Maybe one thing I am kind of interested in is, like, what have you found most interesting or most cool about React Native? Like, what part of it was or shocking, right? Like, something new you kind of learned as you were building React Native.
Yeah. So, like I said, the first job that I got when I went into web development was with Meteor and React. And so at the time I didn't have a full-time position. I was just doing contract. And this startup said, hey, React, we're going to do something React Native. Do you think you could handle it? And I was. Within 2 days, I was building out features, and that's an amazing thing, because by now, most of us in the Meteor community, we're using React, or we've tried React if we don't like it, but like a lot of people, it has widespread adoption. And so the fact that you can be efficient in mobile in such a short amount of time is really powerful. Yeah.
I guess, speaking to that, one thing that's maybe giving me pause every time I try to think about building something, like, as a non-designer, how are you finding the whole, like, it's basically got its own CSS subset system that it uses for design, and it's based off Flexbox. Like,
Right.
how have you found that to be? Because, like, generally I use something like Ionic or Meteoric, or even, like, Bootstrap does a decent job if you push it hard enough, of giving you a mobile interface looking kind of design. Like, what's that experience been like?
So you're right. I'm not a designer. I'm a developer, and so that was a shortcoming that I ran into early when I wanted to build an app that I felt was professional looking. And honestly, that's why I paired with a product manager, because he had such a great knowledge of Flexbox and design, and it knew kind of the things to look out for. Like, one thing that can get you in trouble is if you design for one of the larger iPhone models, and then you see how it looks in one of the lower models, and the font's too big, and it's overflowing and everything. So like, you have to design from one of the smaller models first, so that when you try the other models and it works. So like things like that, Nick was really good, and he just has that eye. It's like, it's almost like you're born with the right taste to know what's a good design. I will say that there are some companies coming forward and trying to build out more opinionated UI kits to use with React Native. So we have a company called Shout'em, and they're actually going to be presenting at our next meetup in New York City. And they offer kind of a, choose from this UI kit of buttons and, all kinds of elements that you can, instead of having to create a touchable opacity with a text element inside of it and then design it according to Flexbox, they've kind of done all that for you. So I think a lot of people are coming forward to offer some easier solutions for that.
So I know that there's a React Native package manager, which are RNPM, but I don't exactly know how that's different from NPM.
Yeah, sure. So RNPM so what happens is that if you NPM install some of your dependencies, it will install them in the JavaScript bundle, but it will have assets or files that need to be compiled in Xcode. And so you'd get these repos for like React Native Video or React Native Image Picker, and you'd npm install and they wouldn't work because the repo and the README instructions, they'd have, you have to go into Xcode, and then you have to, compile this binary, and, you have to link it to your main project. And so RNPM came along, and they just solved that problem. And so that's the main reason why it exists, so that you don't have to manually configure Xcode for all of these libraries. Okay,
that makes sense. Yeah, because I know there are still components for React Native just on NPM that you could pull in and kind of, like normal React and Lego blocks and just configure them. So that's cool.
Yeah, that brings up a good point too, like Xcode. How was that transition for you? Like you went from dealing with Chrome, the web browser, as your kind of debugging tool, and now like you're compiling for the phone, and you're dealing with Xcode, and like there have been instances, at least with Cordova, where I actually have to dive into like Xcode and use it to debug what's going on in the app. Like, was that like easy for you, or frustrating, or kind of what was that like?
Oh, incredibly frustrating. Like I said, like that now when I do it, and in fact, one of the requests we had for the tutorial is deployment. And so the past weekend, I took the kind of, it's a meetup clone that we built in the React Native tutorial. And so I took it and went through the process of going through test flight and then submitting the app for the App Store and running on the device. And now it's easy because like I can go back to my notes and everything. But when I was doing it the first time, it was a nightmare. There's so many kind of like hard to find little things, and Xcode doesn't always, it doesn't tell you do this and then that. It's just like, it just shouts at you, this is not working.
Wait till you get something in the App Store and then your certificate expires. That was a terrible process too.
Yeah. So it's funny. The first blog post I wrote about React Native was like 10 things that we learned. And one of them, what I actually did, this is embarrassing, but it was a side project. And, in React Native, there's two ways of running the app. You can run it locally with a node, a node process running locally, or you can create a bundle. And the bundle is what you actually, install on an iOS device. And I didn't know that. So I just, archived my project, submitted to the App Store. I didn't do test flight because I didn't know about test flight. And I waited a week, and I get back, your app is a blank screen. And I'm like, I'm using Simulator, and no, I swear it's not a blank screen. So I submitted it again, waited another week, got the same error. And finally, it took me like reaching out to a bunch of React people who like, okay, this is what you have to do. And no one was like, oh, you're so stupid. Like, I can't believe you did that. Like, they were really nice.
Like the App Store is a terrible process. Like I think in all honesty, you could probably write an entire book on each App Store deployment process and still miss it. And
then there's things like, so I registered with Apple as an individual account, and it's like, it shows my app and it's like Thomas Goldenberg. Like that doesn't sound professional. I want to make it a business account. That is I never did it. Like I looked into how to do it, and I like looked on forums how you would transfer from an individual to a business account, and it was like, no, that's way too much time. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had to get on the phone with an Apple rep when the certificate expired, and they had to walk me through like how to fix it. And it's like, I feel bad. Like I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. I should be able to figure this out. I Googled around for a couple hours and just finally gave up and called Apple. Like, what the hell, guys?
I will say that a couple months ago, the app that we had on the iOS store, it's actually called Bhagavad Gita app, because so I used to live in India for 9 years and used to teach the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit at university. So I made my own translation, and that's the app that we originally made. And I wanted to port it over to Android, and I prepped like a whole week of like that deployment process. And I think it was like 2 hours, and it was up on the Google Play Store. It was like, yeah, mind blown. Yeah. So that is nice.
All right. Maybe the last question, then we'll get into our picks, our show picks. How have you found the kind of the add-on library selection to be? So I know like with Cordova, I can easily say like, npm install and bring in like Cordova packages that allow me to access Bluetooth or the camera or anything like that. Like, how has that bit been as far as like, how's it work and what's it been like?
Yeah, I will say that what I found with some of these third-party libraries is around the time that React Native made some breaking changes, a lot of these libraries weren't actively maintained. And then, I'd find that if I wanted to use the latest React Native version, I'd have to actually go in their code and fork it and get around those difficulties. Now it's, since that time, since like, I want to say like 2-3 months ago, it's been a lot easier, and a lot of these projects are really being actively maintained. So that's my own personal experience was, when we were building the tutorial, things like, I'm trying to think, like Google Analytics was really bad for a while. Another one was, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There were one or two repos that I had to fork and kind of fix the bugs. And then when I was redoing the tutorial about a month ago, I found that all those issues have been solved. So there probably was like a rough period during some breaking changes, but now, camera, contacts, all this kind of stuff, there's very good support.
What about routing? Because I know I've heard in the past that routing is just like there's a lot of routers to choose from, and people pop in the Slack chat on the creator Slack chat and or Spacedojo Slack chat and ask about this. Is that solved? Is there a blessed chosen router, or how does that work now?
Not yet. I've used all three. I mean, actually, I'm aware of 3 major ones, and then there's other ones as well. But, when React Native first came out, the easiest to use was the Navigator iOS. And that's what we actually used for the Bhagavad Gita app for our first iOS app. It's just really easy to use for simple apps. It has its own UI and everything. And then we heard that Facebook wasn't using that, and they're switching to Navigator. And so the tutorial is based off of Navigator. And Navigator is not opinionated as to UI, so you can have any kind of scene transition and everything. Now the new one is Navigation Experimental. I've used that for the, as I was saying, the Android app that I put out a couple months ago. And it's really nice. I actually like it. It fits in with the model, especially if you're using Redux to encapsulate your state. And this has been a problem, I want to say, on the web as well, of finding a routing solution that works within that framework of a single state object. And so I've used the Navigation Experimental. I really like it. But for the tutorial, we use Navigator because that is still like the most stable one, I feel, at this point. And Navigation Experimental is like, as the name implies, right? So there are options, and I think for new people coming in, that can kind of confuse things a little bit. If you're using Redux, I would recommend Navigation Experimental. If you're not using Redux and you just have experience with React, I would say Navigator is the best way to go.
Yeah. I've also heard about, there's one that has Flux in the name. Have you played with that at all? That seems to be popular.
Yeah, I've seen a couple. Now there's like the new React router is out too, and now people are trying to incorporate that in React Native as well. I haven't had time to really sit down with the other alternatives and compare them.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool.
All right. So I forgot for the last episode, but this episode, I want to make sure we do it. At the end of the show, we just ask everybody on the show, like, what's their pick for the show? And it doesn't have to be related to tech. It can really be anything, just something that's improved your life in some way. And we love to share this stuff because it can help other people sometimes. So let's go around real quick and do that. Does anyone want to go first?
I can go first.
All right.
So Google Allo came out today, which is pretty exciting. If you haven't heard of that, it's kind of like Google's new Messenger. We got yet another one, but hopefully this kills all the other ones, because it's kind of like all the Messenger apps are all converging and they all look like each other. So this is kind of similar to iMessage, but then similar to Slack in the sense of you have like the Google Assistant bot there, like in your chat. So you can, you're talking to somebody and you can say, hey, like, want to do lunch? And then Google's like, hey, do you want restaurant suggestions? And you're like, sure. And a bunch of cards pop up of restaurants near you and that type of stuff. You can like Google search from the chat app, like with a group, or pretty interesting. So I checked that out. It's cool. And it works on iOS and Android.
Yeah. I think maybe that's a big problem is Apple was short-sighted in not putting out an iMessage for like the Android platform.
Yeah, I thought they might this last WWDC, and then nope.
That's the tough part, right? Like, as an all Apple family, having outside family members that want to talk to my kids, and all they have is iMessage, and I'm like, I'm not gonna do anything for you. Sorry. Yeah. You can text them, I guess.
Yeah, texting works.
Get a phone.
And then the other pick is I got a Yeti cup. My fiance got me a Yeti cup. Where's the labels? Down there? Bam. And it's like all I drink out of. I put ice in it and water, and it stays cold for days, and it's fantastic. So
nice.
There you go.
Awesome.
Should I go?
Yeah, go ahead if you got one.
So the biggest thing in my life in the past couple months, I got to go on a honeymoon with my wife Jess, and we went for 3 weeks to India, and it was pretty awesome. We went from the very south in Kerala, took the train to the north, and then went up in the Himalayas like 12,000 feet, I think. Yeah, so that was cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So this is going to sound weird, but I'm going to say the IRS.
That sounds weird.
Yeah. So, like, I want to commend them. I got my 501(c) approval in exactly a week. So my wife and I have been working on starting a nonprofit to teach kids how to code, with a particular focus on like involving gaming to draw their interest in. And like we applied on September 7th maybe, and we got this thing exactly 1 week later, like the approval, and everyone's like, oh, it's terrible, it takes at least 6 months if you do the regular form. We were able to do the short form, and like they just turned it around. Like everyone was telling us this would be at least 6 weeks, and they got it done in like a week. So I say kudos to them for being on the ball with that. I love it.
Good.
And one thing I also want to say is, of course, the tutorial that I made is now available, and I wanted to just let it be known that we're offering a discount for the Crater listeners. So if they just put in the word Crater as a promo code, you get a discount. It's at buildreactnative.com.
Yeah, I guess we didn't mention it, but is it a book that they're getting when they buy it?
It's an ebook. So you read it on the website. Very similar to the Discover Meteor, how they did the way of learning Meteor.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and it's been a real pleasure discussing React Native again, and the community certainly seems to have leapt forward, and I'm kind of excited. I'm hoping in the next month I can put together a video tutorial series on building a React Native app. So
nice.
I'm gonna give that a try.
Great.
Yes.
Very cool. Well, it's nice. Thanks for having me, and Ben, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, guys.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
This video has been a Spacedojo production. You can click the Learn More button to find out more about us at spacedojo.com, or you can click the subscribe button to get notified about new videos we put out each week. Thanks for watching.